Hello, audience! Does everything feel weird and different? It's because we got a new lens. Let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Any pointers to make it look even better, or just scream incoherently and tell me to go back to what you know. And yes, I'm even trying a new lapel mic for the podcast, The Discussion, to see if it's better for us to use something like this. Do you want to hear the audio for this? Well, you don't get to! But actually getting to the topic at hand, yes, this is the return to discussion type videos here on the channel. Don't worry, now that the adaptation flood is dying down a little bit, we'll see a return to a lot of the types of videos you all have been missing, including a Let's Debate next week. Really excited for that. But today we're gonna be discussing something that's been floating around in various forms online, honestly, for more than a decade. And that's the idea of another sci-fi fantasy franchise coming in to replace or be the next Marvel Cinematic Universe. Granted, this has been floated with tons of various franchises over the years. I'm just going to be focusing on Lord of the Rings because, well, fortunately, it does not seem to be the current trajectory for the franchise. It is probably the most frequently mentioned when specifically talking about fantasy franchises that could be the next big thing. And headlines recently came out of an abandoned plan to, yes, do a series of movies and shows like you've seen in the MCU style for Middle-earth. Fortunately, that did not happen, in my opinion, and it seems to be the push for Middle-earth currently is towards video games, which I actually agree with. But today I'd like to specifically talk about why Middle-earth and most sci-fi fantasy franchises cannot ever be the next MCU, at least not in the shared definition of that type of sprawling cinematic universe. But I do want to put an olive branch of sorts forth to say I do get how on a very surface level evaluation, it does seem like Lord of the Rings has the potential to be a gargantuan cinematic universe. It has a built-in die-hard fan base who have shown up and made previous adaptations, even ones that weren't necessarily critically unanimously loved, very financially successful. It has a rich character roster of iconic characters that you can pretty much go anywhere in the world and find people who will recognize. And the amount of lore you can pull from on surface level seems sensationally rich. And maybe the final point that would make a lot of these executive producer type people in Hollywood look at Lord of the Rings and go, yes, that one. The Venn diagram of fans for things like Marvel and Lord of the Rings does have a substantial overlap. But what I think a lot of people forget, and is a very important part of this conversation, just because someone is a fan of both Marvel and Lord of the Rings does not mean that their fandom is the same or they want a similar treatment to both franchises. And I think what fans of both Marvel and Lord of the Rings want for those prospective franchises tend to be quite different. And I give credit to fans for this, because the fans of Marvel and the fans of Lord of the Rings understand the key difference in how these universes were conceived and executed. First, let's look at Marvel and what has made it the undisputed juggernaut it is in modern day blockbusters. And I do not mean anything I am about to say here as a shot at Marvel. While I do not think they make the deepest films of all time, they have absolutely succeeded in their mission, becoming the most commercially successful cinematic franchise of all time, hands down. Even if you hate Marvel, you can't deny that they've succeeded in that mission up until this point. To the point where we've been talking about superhero fatigue for a decade, and that apparently still has not actually happened because they're breaking their own records. How was that done though? Well, a few key creatives understood that for the better part of a century, Marvel has had literally thousands of artists and writers putting in all kinds of stories you can mine and turn into movies. And there is a somewhat substantial difference in the tone and type of characters that you can bring into a rather familiar format for a story, and therefore make it different enough on the palette to, yes, last for movie after movie after movie and show after show after show. As superhero fatigue started biting at Marvel's heels, and we did see some of their movies not have as good of a return as they wanted, Marvel adapted and started taking on some of the more fringe comic book elements elements, with other genres outside of straightforward superheroes brought in to help with the overall flavor hitting the palate. Now all of a sudden fans are seeing a Sam Raimi directed Doctor Strange movie, or even a sitcom that kind of bulked at the idea of having a superhero finale, to mixed results, but you gotta admit it's at least somewhat different. And the end result is, yes, the Marvel universe that the MCU is pulling from is incredibly chaotic, but it's big enough for the chaos to end up just kind of feeling like it's a living, breathing universe, and good on them for understanding that. It allows you for year after year to make spy thrillers, horror movies, space epics that all taste a bit different but follow a very entertaining and simple structure. That is not a shot at Marvel. I love blockbusters. I've probably seen half of the MCU's movies in theaters, and they're a good time to go get some expensive popcorn, pay for a slushie coming out of a machine that has not been washed recently, and sit in a seat someone spent 2 hours farting in right before you got there to watch a buff guy hit other buff guys. It's fun. But then you turn and you look at the conception of Middle-earth as a whole, and it's a little bit different. It did not have thousands of writers and artists coming in to create all kinds of different stories in multiple universes, and instead it was conceived and mostly written by a World War I veteran who, yes, you're gonna bring up the allegory quote, no, he was not writing a specific allegory, but was widely influenced by his own experiences in the war and also watching this rapid industrialization of the world around him, and wrote something that was extremely reflective of that. There are rich, specific themes about humanity's separation from nature and all kinds of actually sad things about a definitive ending to the story being told. Yes, Tolkien played around with the idea of a sequel, but he made the call not to write it, and I think that was the right one. So then, think about how Marvel was treated, and how then Lord of the Rings would have to be treated to try and have a similar cinematic universe built on the shoulders of the source material. We've already seen one attempt at something that could be classified as similar-ish in the Rings of Power. And no, I don't hate Rings of Power as much as a lot of the rage bait YouTubers on YouTube pretend to, but yeah, I wasn't a fan and found it to be a flashy but mid show. Its lack of compelling characters for me personally really being crippling for my own long-term investment in whatever story they're trying to tell. And that's very indicative, of my opinion, of the first big hurdle you will come across for trying to give this universe a cinematic universe treatment. Lord of the Rings is not some massive sprawling universe in the thematic sense. Nearly everything Tolkien wrote for this universe was serving either a purpose to enhance the themes he told in the main meat of this universe in Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, or their love letters to the fairy tales that inspired him to create and essentially invent a new genre when he put out this modern fairy tale. And I think that distinction is actually a really important one to make. Tolkien did not set out to write an infinitely sprawling universe that would grow forever. Yes, it might feel that way, and it's kind of being treated that way in some specific ways of the publication of new material constantly, but that is a vastly different undertaking that's already getting some mixed results from Tolkien fans than trying to prop up a cinematic universe that must grow and grow and grow and reinvent itself and add new flavors and angles to not hit some kind of burnout. I'm actually of the opinion that even if they manage to make good Lord of the Rings movies or shows that built off each other, you would hit burnout far faster than the superhero genre does. And that's because Marvel is this ever-expansive pool that varies between being like 4 to 6 feet deep. There's some, yes, thematic points made and ideas explored, but it doesn't really feel like it's all building to one idea or one view of humanity. Because yeah, the cinematic universe has embraced what the comics did and brought in a lot of different creatives to take the source material in new directions. Lord of the Rings, on the other hand, is not a large pool. It's a well that was built to serve up one specific story. And it only works because of how deep and specific it is. The more you bring in other creative minds to try and put their own spin on it or reinvent the source material, it's not like Marvel where that's kind of built into the foundation. It's actually antithetical, in my opinion. Batman intro! Whoa, I fell on nothing. Hindsight Daniel here, who caught a possible rebuttal in editing and would like to address it. Now, I of course said everything I've said here while keeping the Silmarillion in mind, but I didn't really address the just general observation that there's a whole lot to pull from there, and you certainly could get a team of writers together who are the best in the business to try and flesh it out to craft some form of Lord of the Rings cinematic universe. And I would like to first just say, of course, if you got the best in the business together and gave them an incredible amount of pre- and post-production time to just make the shit out of a series of Lord of the Rings films, of course they could theoretically be great and the next MCU. I'm just trying to say I don't think it's very likely, and I would personally dread an attempt. But also, this idea that the Silmarillion is somehow this vibrant, rich source of a ton of stories to be told throughout an endless cacophony of shows, movies, and I don't know, whatever the future holds for entertainment. VR sex bots that quote Gandalf, whatever the future holds. I have to imagine if you're of that opinion, you haven't really read the Silmarillion, because, and again, in the Well comparison, it's all very linear. It's quite literally a historical recounting that's just bringing in the events leading up to the meteor stories. And springboarding off of that, an inevitable result, if you may, a lot of the characters within it aren't exactly the most fleshed out. And as I've said many times here before on the channel, characters are key. If I'm not relating or feeling for what is happening to these specific characters, you do not have a story worth watching. Okay, then they just expound upon what was already there. Well, I hope that team of writers you want to bring in, that's the best in the business, is also really good at recreating Tolkien's style of characterization and can flesh out these stories while still maintaining the overall thematic vision Tolkien put within them. Dear Lord, we're saying all of this and we haven't even taken into account just how difficult in the past the Tolkien estate has been to work with and restraining on their vision of what exactly Middle-earth is as a whole. They shake their fists even at the Tolkien trilogy, and I can't imagine this would be conducive to the type of environment where you could get that perfect team together to craft the well fleshed out, as Tolkien would have write them, narratively apt for the grand vision of Middle-earth deep dive into the Silmarillion this would require. It seems like an unlikely go. I mean, take it this way, even Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is widely considered to be one of the best adaptations of a fantasy work of all time, still has naysayers who pick apart certain things that were done that they view as against what Tolkien's vision was. And that's because the people who love this series and have built it up to make this much money respect the initial vision. This isn't Star Wars or Marvel, where it kind of has just become this ever-running hype train. In the soul of the fandom, it's more of a discussion. Any new entry in the live-action format especially is going to be fine-tooth combed by fans. To a ridiculous extent, absolutely. I do think it's a bit absurd, and if you marketed a Lord of the Rings adaptation right, and actually said this isn't supposed to be the most hyper-loyal thing, we're just kind of having fun with the foundations, and just treat it as such, I think you could actually get a lot more leniency from the fan base. And bit of a side note here, but I think one of the biggest flaws that Rings of Power had at its core, and again, I do not hate it as much as most people, it forgot Tolkien was telling a fairy tale. All of this is why I'm actually happy to see that apparently the current plan for Lord of the Rings is to push more in the video game space. You immediately get more leniency from fans, who even in stories like Shadow of Mordor, which massively betray Lord of the Rings lore, they understand we're here for a fun time and they just enjoy being in the Middle-earth setting. And I think there's far more gas in the tank to shift the medium of Lord of the Rings exploration over to games, because you don't just need these third-person adventure games. You could do real-time strategy, turn-based strategy, Skyrim first-person type adventure exploring. And I believe the people behind these headlines for a video game next step for Middle-earth understand that this is also still the fastest growing area of entertainment right now in the world. And this video is brought to you by Snatch.sh. Snatch.sh is a social media platform with a purpose, providing a global community for creatives to come together and share their stories. Unlike other platforms, Snatch stories are created step by step, with little blurbs or snatches that build upon each other to form a unique story, hence the name Snatch. And in case you don't want your story to go mass public, they also have private stories so that you can work with, whether it's a classroom or just a group of friends, on stories that are withheld from the larger gaze. These private stories are secure as heck. Here's your password protecting you. Get out of here. This is a bad eyeball. Leave. Ha! There's also short story sections as well for those who just want to share their creative works. So whether you want to practice writing crime, horror, fantasy, romance, sci-fi, adventure, what have you, Snatch is providing you a place where not only you can get all those ideas down in some quick little blurbs, but get instant feedback as well as new ideas from others contributing to your stories, or you can just practice writing by going to contribute to others' ideas. And all Snatch's building upon stories will be free for anyone to participate. So if you'd like to try it out and support the channel here, click the link in the description down below and begin your writing journey. So funnily enough, the end conclusion of this video is actually kind of positive from me. I think that the right call has been made, and pushing Lord of the Rings into video games more is, one, not going to be as damaging to the legacy in the long terms of trying to pump out a ton of live action stuff and force Lord of the Rings to fit in a square peg when it's a round series. But also, I'm just, as a fan, genuinely excited to do something that's like an updated Battle for Middle-earth, or even, hell, I would play a Rings of Power game that was really good because I love just being in Middle-earth. If you gave Rings of Power the same type of video game adaptation that the Peter Jackson movies did, I'd play it. I wouldn't rewatch the show, but I would really enjoy just being in that age of Middle-earth. But all of this is based from a subjective fan standpoint, and I would love for the discussion to continue in the comments down below. Do you disagree with me and you think, no, Lord of the Rings fans love Marvel in the same way that Marvel fans do and will show up for a popcorn Lord of the Rings experience? Or would you take it even further and say that loads of fantasy series could be the next MCU, Malazan, etc., etc.? And I'll give those people an olive branch. I do think there is one contender that has showed it has a lot of different types of stories that could kind of be connected and have a similar appeal, and that would be the Cosmere. I think actually Sanderson's made an intentional choice to lean into something that could almost feel like a cinematic universe. But to say Tolkien had the foresight to specifically set up Lord of the Rings to get the same treatment, he didn't watch color films while writing this, so I don't think so. But that was just my thoughts on a topic. I look forward to the continued discussion in the comments down below, and like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you'd like to support what I do here, and if you would like some more Daniel today, go ahead and check out my second channel where my best bud and I, Noah, just put out our review of Roma. Here's a clip.
That is a real, true, honest fact. When people buy koi fish, when people buy domesticated, which is not the right term, but it's the only thing that I can think of. When people buy koi fish for their homes, every fourth fish is a fake fish, and it has to do with luring males away, aggressive males away from females. That's part of it. So when you buy koi fish, you have to buy them in even sets of 4. And so the fourth fish is like literally like an animatronic fish that will like sort of like lure the males away from any potential females. That is a real thing. And the other reason that they do it is for keeping track of the koi fish. So they will keep track of the koi fish and they will label the fish, right? And so you'll have like an A koi, a B koi, a C koi, and a D koi. Roma!
And have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high tier Patreons, Torin Bencini and Stratom.